Be right back. A bill making its way through the Texas legislature would prevent parents from suing their doctor if their baby is born with a disability. Supporters say it's needed to protect doctors from wrongful birth lawsuits and to protect the rights of the disabled. But opponents say it will result in doctors lying to their patients about the health of the fetus. And joining me now is Senator Brandon Creighton, the author of the so-called wrongful birth bill. Thanks so much for being on the show.
Hi, it's great to be here.
Well, why do you think this legislation is necessary?
You know, we've seen a trend across the country with about a dozen states removing this cause of action from the books. It's considered by many, and the testimony in committee showed the same, that it's somewhat archaic. Testing 40 years ago, ultrasound technology 40 years ago, even some of the challenges that faced expecting mothers, we've just made great medical advances in that amount of time. And this cause of action through the testimony in the committee showed that it needs to be removed from the books.
You know, opponents, as I just mentioned, have argued that this will allow doctors to lie to their patients, or because of religious beliefs and not wanting them to have an abortion. You know, what's your response to that?
We had some initial coverage that, unlike yourself, didn't bother to involve me as the author in the interview, and so that caused quite a stir. But there is nothing in this legislation whatsoever that diminishes a patient's rights to hold a physician accountable. There's nothing in this legislation whatsoever that removes a standard of care that is consistent with the entire profession of OB-GYNs and gynecologists at all. So if a bad actor doctor actually did withhold very vital or crucial information from a patient, there are negligence causes of action that are currently in place. There are fraud and emotional distress causes of action that can be used, and of course the medical board licensure process allows for a grievance process as well. So even attorneys that make a living holding bad actor physicians accountable testified in committee saying we don't use this cause of action.
What about added protections for parents, for patients?
Well, we've got a provision that we work closely with the Texas Medical Association on in the legislation, and it's the last sentence of the legislation. It's only 2 or 3 paragraphs total, the entire bill. Mm-hmm. But that provision specifically says that nothing in removing this cause of action would allow a physician to act outside of the standard of care in any manner whatsoever. So patients are protected.
How many of these kinds of lawsuits have been filed over the years?
We don't know. You know, there's a need to remove this cause of action from the books, or 12 states wouldn't be leading the trend on it. But because a lot of these cases settle ahead of time, we don't really know how many of them are actually brought. We do know that big law firms in Houston and Austin are advertising based on the statute or the cause of action, and with that advertising they get clients in, they determine whether or not they have an appropriate fact pattern, but usually they end up going the negligence route, not the wrongful birth route.
You know, we've heard from some mothers and people that are caring for kids who are disabled and mm-hmm. just have said that they wish that they didn't have to have given them that life. Mm-hmm. What's your response to, you know, the people that have had to watch their kids suffer?
Well, the problem, first of all, with the wrongful birth cause of action is that it sends a message that disabled children are worth less than a child that's born without disabilities, because a physician that acts within the appropriate standard of care under this cause of action still could be held liable for compensation and damages related to rearing the child, even though the physician did absolutely everything correct. That's the wrong message to send. We're seeing a trend of less and less medical students going into the field because of liabilities that exist like this, and we want the Texas physicians to be the best and the brightest in the country, and that these old causes of action are just not the way to foster that.
We're running out of time, but I also wanted to ask, because your Buy America bill passed the Senate last week, and it would require Texas to use only steel made in America in state projects. Explain kind of your reasoning behind this. I know you've got some backing from the president.
Sure. Well, there's definitely alignment.
I mean, not specifically, but
on parallel goals there, and the timing was interesting between when the administration and Texas both were working on these issues. But we've had Buy America provisions in federal law since the 1930s. Certainly for transportation projects were even reinforced at the federal level since the 70s. Texas state legislature adopted for transportation these provisions in '95 and in 2013 for water. So what this would do is, for iron and steel, it would encourage infrastructure and state buildings to work towards buying American and relying on American manufacturers and American workers in the supply of iron and steel. Because, let's face it, American workers and American companies, Texas companies and Texas workers should have to compete against any company in the world, but they should not have to compete against other governments. And China and Turkey and other foreign governments are causing a government-backed glut in our steel and manufacturing market just for punitive reasons.
Senator Creighton, we're going to have to end there because we are out of time, but we'll get you back in to talk more about all of these subjects. Thanks so much for being on the show. We appreciate it.
Thank you. Appreciate it.